It's easy to get lost. This is The Revenue Maze, and I'm Valerie Cobb. Join me as we navigate the halls, dead ends, and U-turns on your path towards upward growth trajectory. The Revenue Maze is sponsored by Revenue North Star, guidance and execution through fractional revenue leadership, uncovering hidden revenues, and empowering small business growth through process-driven sales customized to your company environment. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another great episode of The Revenue Maze. I have so much fun on these shows, and I am so excited for this guest today because he cracks me up. He's so fun. He is a commercial animal. Now, when we're going to talk about a commercial animal, he has worked through his 20 plus years with Philip Morris. Yes, you know that one, but wait for it. Guinness, Diageo. That's another one. Scottish and Newcastle, and last, Heineken, much other companies as well, but those are notable at this point in the game. And when he's not a commercial animal, he's an animal out on skiing and traveling. So he's like the man's man. I mean, it's like the most interesting man in the world, right? And I say that because he's really actually humble, and he is probably dying in his shoes right now because I kind of take that to have some fun. Anyways, I really think it's exciting what he's doing. He's in predictive, highly knowledgeable about AI and predictive analytics. And he will say, maybe that's not so fun for everybody, but for me, it's like music. So I love that. He helps FMCG companies improve their commercial planning. And his company is a finalist in the Grocer Gold Awards 2022 for Tech Initiative of the Year. He is CEO of Action Insight Management. Welcome, Graeme Scott-Dodd.
Thank you very much. Embarrassed, and hopefully I can live up to all of that that you've just given me as an intro. So, thank you for inviting me.
Okay, so if anybody doesn't know the reservation of Scotsman, you just witnessed it. So anyways, I love it. And of course, my USA kind of behavior, anyway. All right, Graeme, but we want to hear about all these wonderful things that you're doing, especially in the analytics world, because it's helping so many people. Many organizations, I wouldn't say people, but we always answer one question for the audience. What is one thing that you can tell the audience that will help them get out of the revenue maze?
I always struggle with getting down to one thing, a list of things. So the best I can think of is to know what you're chasing. So what I mean by that is, the title of this is, the revenue maze. So is it revenue you're chasing? Is it volume? Is it a lot of what I say is going to hark back to consumer goods, FMCG, where we're shifting product, a number of products, but a lot of these things hopefully will transfer into other businesses. But yeah, so what are you chasing? Is it volume? Is it revenue? But the key thing most businesses are now moving to is it's profit, because without the profit, you can't survive. But all the other things lead into that profit. So, I'm intrigued always when I go to new clients, what are you looking for? And it seems to throw them, because everybody around the room has actually a different message. Usually the finance guy can, pretty quickly go, well, we need profit. Whereas the sales guy is looking for volume, so you've got different views around the table. And then we've got to try and pull that together to show them, well, how does each lever move down towards the profit? So that was a long answer to a short question.
Well, no, it wasn't, because I think that brings up an excellent topic, and the audience want to hear, some good ideas on how to get to what they're chasing for the moment, because it also will depend a bit on their stage in their cycle of their business, right? If they're an early stage, late stage, what are they trying to accomplish? And I've said this before, because I use this all the time, and people probably are sick of hearing it, but it's the the typical Allison in Wonderland thing. If you don't know where you're going, then it doesn't matter. Right? So how do you get out of the, you've got to figure out how to chase, what do you need to chase at that moment? So give us some pointers on how you've kind of worked that through with maybe some of your clients and how that has helped.
Yeah, there's um,
just just in 3 minutes, right?
Okay, yeah. I'll do my best.
No, I'm kidding.
So you need to understand what are the drivers of your business.
Sure.
In consumer goods, there's four main ones that a lot of companies or a lot of research companies can give you. Kantar is one of the companies that can sell you this data, and it's penetration. So how many people are buying? It's frequency. How often are they buying? It's weight of purchase. So how much are they buying each time, and what are they spending on each time? So with those four levers, you can work out your total volume may be going through the roof, but you find out that actually you've lost a lot of shoppers, but all you've got is the really heavy users. And so how do you get the others back? So just by those four and trending it over time, you get a message of everything may be going well. I've not really seen it when all four are going in the right direction. But at least by looking at those, you can work out, okay, versus last year, which one's gone down? Which ones have gone up? Which is driving my business? And therefore, what tactics do I need to put into place to hopefully hold the good ones, but improve the ones that have slipped? They look at the top line figures, we're selling more. Well, a lot of companies, and now I'm going to go back to the list that I started with, but a lot of the drivers that we find is your distribution may have gone up or down. So how many stores you're in, but you think your volume's gone up 10%. So great. If your distribution's gone up 20%, you're actually selling less per store or less per percentage distribution, and therefore your rate of sale is actually going down. So what's wrong with your brand? Why aren't people buying it? And so just looking at the top line is very, very dangerous. Certainly if you're planning for the future. So.
Well, and it's really sage words because and again, I'm going to come back and I'm not teasing anymore. I'm not, honestly, knowing that information, it does translate to almost any industry in the world, because the reality is, and you and I have had conversations even about price elasticity, all the things that can maybe really change that bottom line. But again, what they're looking for, maybe they're looking for an exit strategy. So yeah, you look at the top line, you try to get as many clients as but at the end of the day, if you're really, most businesses are looking to make sure that they're profitable. I mean, you're in business to be profitable, right? So if you're eroding margins just because you can say, I'll sell something for $100,000, and that $100,000 costs you literally up to the penny of the $100,000, you're not profitable, right? So that's the dumb kind of thought process of top line only.
So you bring a good point. When I jumped ship from Heineken and started my own consultancy, one of the clients, I'd gone in, done all the crunching, and showed them how to make the most profit. Here's the pricing. It was a pretty good presentation as far as I was concerned. Got right the way to the end, and the CEO turned around and said, "Okay, but we're not looking for profit." And nobody had thought to tell me what, and I hadn't thought to ask. So it was a naive thought. But they were VC backed, and they were trying to grow. And to keep investment coming in, they needed to show that their category growth was faster than category. So they were stealing more and they were growing within the category. That was their target. Whether they made any money, wanted to make money, that'll come eventually once the investors keep on investing. So that was a huge learning for me, that I'd done quite a bit of work and then shown them something that actually they weren't interested in. So I went back and implemented it. Well, all the information was in there, but had to bring it back out to show them how to target a different player, how to become number two rather than number three. And so, understand. Well, I suppose I'm using my own advice there, that know what you're trying to drive for.
Exactly.
I drove for the wrong thing. So
Well, we've all been there. I mean, there's famous case studies for Silicon Valley that talks about buying business. You're literally, your goal is not profitability right at that point. It's brand recognition, whatever, or getting customers in the door. And then eventually, and it is a strategy, but in general, like I said, unless they're trying to sell off or they're doing something like that, most companies would like to be profitable. And so as we look at that, there's a number of variables that impact that, and modeling, a lot of modeling. So you get a lot of people, well, I've got a gut sense, right? But what is that gut sense really telling you if the numbers tell you a completely different story? And I talked about a CFO that made literally music with numbers. He was like a maestro with numbers. It told an fact-driven story that sometimes people will say, well, in communication, it's words, 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 but numbers can communicate very concisely. So I love hearing your analytics story. So I love how you're taking those numbers and driving a story that helps these companies. Tell us a little bit more about that. There's some fun stuff with the Scottish government. There's, tell us a little bit.
yeah, I mean, I go way back. When I was at Diageo, there was a great finance guy called Dom DeSange, who's now in the food industry, and he wet my out that we had a relativity tool, so you could look at your own product versus another of your own product and see how much was stolen. So if you did a price deal on one, what comes to the other, and that whet my appetite. I've always liked numbers, so I've moved from selling, and I never liked asking a question unless I already knew the answer to it in selling. So moving into, I think it was category management right at the early stages, and then finding this tool that whet my appetite on you can get something out of the numbers. So then moving on to the beer company, it was slightly like moving back 5 to 10 years in thinking and data availability. So you were just saying about people having an opinion. Every man and his dog had an opinion based on gut feeling, and it always started with "I think," and there was no backup or no proof, or and everybody around the table trying to plan. There's 15 different plans. So part of my role there became tell them what they need to do, and that's where this germ of okay, let's get the big. I actually went to one of the big data houses who also do consulting. I won't embarrass them by saying who they are. Everybody in FMCG will know them. And I said, look, I was spending £500,000 a year. This is 25 years ago. I was spending £500,000 pounds on data, just raw data, which shows you how much we were buying. And we were spending about 100 million a year as a business on pricing, promotions, trade support. Didn't really know we didn't know what we were getting back for it. We just knew we had to do it.
Yeah.
And so I went to them and said, look, tell me all about what I should tell these guys. What's the elasticity? I didn't really know what elasticity was at that stage. And well, apparently neither did they. But anyway, they went off, did lots of crunching. I still remember I spent £105,000 on one report, 82 pages long, and it only had 2 numbers in it that could tell me what to give to the guys.
Oh,
that went in a drawer very quickly. But the one number that they came back with was, well, beer has an elasticity of minus 2.6. So, okay, in my naivety, fine, now I've got a number. So that means for every 1% of price you move one way or the other, the volume will move 2.6 in the opposite direction. That's why the minus. So I thought, okay, the problem is that makes it linear. So that's a straight line. So if you take 10% off and get 10% extra back, according to them, if you take 20%, you'll get 20%. You don't. It's a curve, and it's an exponential curve. So it's a lot more difficult to actually work out, which is probably why they didn't do it. And so I, in my naivety, used that figure and then realized very, very occasionally we were correct. Most of the time we were wrong because we were at the wrong point of the curve. So from there, whet my appetite. Tell me when I bore you on this, by the way, because I can.
You're not
So,
boring me. I'm actually seeing numbers in my head as you tell this story because I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, because for how much volume, yeah, keep going.
so at that stage, I thought, I've just spent a lot of money. I've hidden that because I didn't want anybody to know how much I'd spent and got very little back. I thought, right, we can do better.
Yeah.
And that's when I started getting into it. Using my knowledge from Diageo, I actually went out to, I think it's wholesalers to begin with, not even the retailers, got some different data and started crunching them myself, trial and error, and then started working out the elasticity curves. And that's where it all started from. I took that to the MD at the time, who, luckily for me, got it,
Yeah.
understood it, and just thought, that makes sense. 2 weeks later, I was running a department called market modeling before anybody even knew what that was.
Yeah.
And, and then I had a load of statisticians, some very, very bright people working for me. And then it took about 14 months of going down rabbit holes and thinking, yep, we've got it. No, we haven't. Because it is very difficult. And there's so many moving parts. That's why just when you think you've got it, no. So anyway, did manage to crack the key part of it. And then I moved on to other things. But the analysis there, a few learnings that measure what you can manage or what you can control. There was a time that I employed somebody purely just for a week. We got access to a very clever tool from one of the biggest retailers, and all it did was, it gave us a lot of information of what happens when something moves. And it cost 20,000 just to have access for the week. It was hugely expensive. So I employed somebody just to download things for a week and not analyze anything, just download it. And then we realized from that we had so much information that so much of it was actually nice to know, but we couldn't actually use any of it. We couldn't replicate any of it again.
Yeah.
So again, this is sounding like terrible, but I'd spent quite a bit of money, and we did get some good stuff out of it. But and probably about the same time, there was a story actually which came over from the US. Whether it originated, the story was that it came from analysts at Anheuser-Busch, and that they had worked out that if you, what was it, blokes, men, will get sent out to buy nappies at 5 o'clock on a Friday night because we've run out, and the lady of the house will say, yeah, you've got to go. So if you put beer next to nappies at 5 o'clock on a Friday night, all of a sudden you sell more because the men have been sent out. And that story went around the industry, and everybody's, oh, very interesting, very interesting. And then you start realizing, well, that's great to know, but we can't do anything about that. We can't afford to put somebody into every store, 4:30 on a Friday afternoon just to reposition the beer. So that's when you start realizing there's need to know and want to know. And most of us get caught up in the want to know because, oh, that'll be interesting. But actually, it's the need to know. So there's a level that you can go down to. You go too far, and if you can't control it or do something about it, not one of your levers to sell with the buyer, you've probably gone too far. So that was one of our key learnings in that. Well, and certainly in that 14 months was, we really went too far and analyzed everything, and then realized that we've probably spent 6 months getting to the nit grit of something we can't use.
Yeah, you find yourself sometimes when you're dealing in some of that, you find yourself going, wow, that's cool. Wow, that's cool. Wow, that's cool. And then you turn around and go, yeah, but that was a total waste of time. Why am I doing why am I thinking? Am I just like I don't know, maybe in the UK they have Jeopardy as well, but all the factoid stuff that goes on, it's kind of like, well, that's so nice that they know all that, but you spent all your time trying to figure out facts and memorize facts. And so I kind of say it's almost like when you're looking at what to capture, you're saying, I got to figure out, first of all, companies need to know where they're going, because that's kind of the starting point. Where are you going? And what are the drivers that are going to really help you figure out that that's you're winning, you're losing, whatever you're doing, and look at those things. But on top of that, we were talking about just on another podcast, obviously simplifying it, because it a lot of times we're like, well, what if you get in these what if scenarios and you spend months doing what if, right? Months or years, sometimes what if, before you ever even move on anything.
As I said, pretty much everything we do now is based on what are the levers that a sales guy can use with an account.
Mm-hmm.
So, what can they influence and what can they actually negotiate on? So in the UK, I'm not sure in the US, but in the UK, the actual retail price is the retailer's prerogative by law. So, as a supplier, we could never dictate what that is. However, we could influence them by saying, if you do this, this might happen, which is pretty much where my business is anchored on. But all the other levers, and this is where we get the difference from the revenue down to the profit. Certainly in consumer goods, it's what are you selling? What price are you selling at to the retailer? So how much money are you making, and how much are they making? And if you do a promotion, who's paying for that, and whose margin is that coming out of? And so we find a lot of the time that a product may be price elastic, which means you drop the price and you will sell more, and there's more total profit comes in. Great. But if you've given away all of your margin because you're paying for all of that promotion, you may sell a lot, but your profit may go down. And the retailer is laughing because they're not having to pay anything and they're getting more sales. So for us, a key part is working out, okay, there's the total volume, the total profit or profit pool, but also how do you split that down? Who's paying what? And that's when the kind of finance side comes into it. It's basically putting the predicted volume onto an existing P&L. And, so what you're paying for things. And if the volume is predicted and is accurate, then pretty much you know what your costs are. We do find at times that the old way for sales, and if there's salespeople watching, they're going to hate me saying this, but certainly in my experience, we had some salespeople that wanted to do a promotion with their customer because the customer wants it. So you want to keep the customer happy.
Yeah.
And so they would do a normal, here's the plan, and it does a quick cash up and think that loses us money or it doesn't make enough. So all they would do is just change the volume they were going to sell. So, this activity is going to sell 10,000 units. Doesn't make any. If I sell 20,000, it makes money. But they haven't changed anything to sell that 20,000 more.
Yeah.
So unfortunately for some salespeople, what we do now, because it's quite smart predictions, is takes away that guesswork. But also they've got to, if they want to put a different number in, then if they can justify it, great.
Well, and any company, anybody on the listening that is managing any kind of sales team at all, they run into that. The first thing the salesman comes back and says is, the customer wants a discount. How much can I give them? And you've just answered the question, right? And it's funny because sometimes people, well, you're a sales manager. I'm like, not really, because at the end of the day, I do the exact same thing. It's like, well, let's look at the modeling and let's see if there's any room. And if there isn't, we look at all facets of what that's going to do to the profitability, not just the top line, but the profitability of it. And sometimes you and I've talked about this, we do it strategically, right? There's times when you're trying to get a big client on, so you're willing to pay for that client because that's what you're doing in profits. You're paying for it in profits, right? And then eventually have a plan of attack to get out of that mess. But what I like about what you just said is you've got the model that also says, well, this is how much we need to do to make up for that, buying that customer or discounting, or however you want to verbalize that, right? And at the end of the day, it's kind of, we talked about you and tribal knowledge. Like some of this was all locked in your head and you had to be the one who went through and consulted the entire thing, and that you became the bottleneck of the system because it would take time for you to do this, and you're creating a proven and a repeatable kind of technology that has kind of given that brain dump or that tribal knowledge to create
Yeah,
something that's makes it easier.
yeah, I'd forgotten I told you about that bit. Um, that took me back to, well, we were working with, as a consultancy, so we've been going for about 9 years, going into clients and all. We've never gone out looking for business. The network has always come because we get pretty good results.
Yeah.
And as you said, well, I was working with the Scottish government. They're helping us grow in certain areas, and then they turned around at one point and said, which I probably knew that in a way, but I was turning business away because I was the front guy, and there's only so many hours in the day, and that was a great situation to be in to a certain degree. But as the commercial animal, I wanted to make more. So so they turned around and said, "Look, you are the bottleneck," which I had to listen to, and they said, the way through this is obviously turn everything you're doing into software, and then it can be scaled up, etc. Um, and I mean, it makes absolute sense. So that was probably about 3 years ago we started doing that, and so that's when I learned to sit in darkened rooms with some very clever software engineers, but trying to get all of my thinking and the modeling tools that I had, etc., and get all that into a usable format in the right order, doing the right thing, and all of the binary decisions that when you're planning, well, do we want to do this or that? So all of the thought process, which was way more difficult than I anticipated to begin with. But I mean, pulled away from dealing with clients for a while, so we could sit in these darkened cupboards and write code. Which I'm not a coder, by the way.
I pretend to be one. No, I'm just kidding. Keep going.
Yeah, my BS isn't that strong. So, uh, and so yeah, we then came out the other end, a few tweaks and everything. I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so I'm never happy about these kind of things because there's always more we can do. But we came out with some great tools that are really accurate on how to predict the future based on what's gone on. And yeah, we found different things that markets do move on. So we built it, and then we actually created it 4 times. So we now do all our modeling. When you put the data in, it will then look at 13 weeks, 26 weeks, 52 weeks, and 104 weeks. So it does it 4 times to work out what is the strongest model, so that we know that the best advice is going to be the one that comes out, not the one with the highest uplift, but the one with the strongest relationship. And so all the way through this, because as a user, anything that gets put in front of me, I want to know, how much can I trust this?
Yes.
And if I don't know how to do something, I really need to know how much I can trust. So we built that into all the models, so exactly per SKU, stock keeping unit, per product, per portfolio, per brand, how much can you truly trust what you're seeing on the front here? And that helps when clients seeing it. Not only they may know, we look at history and we say, well, it should do this. We say, well, actually, it did do that. So they can. But we built that into the system. So we're now, if the data's good, we're usually within 1 to 2% error across a year, which are predictions. Yeah, we're pretty happy with that one.
Yeah, no, that's a great one. So you brought up some good points. Trusting or credibility of what the output is, right? We run into that all the time. So yesterday I was working with a company, and we're needing to obviously get some data on sales teams, and they don't have a baseline yet, and there's always that cart before the horse kind of thing is, well, what metric do we, if we need to see how much effort it's going to take, what kind of teams do you build, all of that kind of stuff, and modeling out 5 years. Cause like you and I talked about, I, as a CRO, I look 5 years out, and walk backwards, right? And sometimes it's not terribly accurate. You do a tam sam sum and you hope you're pretty close, with, especially with either early stage or resurrections. And a lot of those companies either have very bad data. If they're a resurrection, they just don't even know why their product has gone stale, or they're eroding margin faster than they know what's going on, because they really weren't tracking it properly. And then you have the early stagers that they're just relying on best practices in their, whatever their category is or their industry, right? So when you're talking about trusting that part of it is sort of kind of like saying, this is the best practice over 25 years, so I can get within 1% to 2% margin of error. That is incredible, right? Because there is a lot of what we call swagging out there, which is a big guess. I won't go into the acronym, but it's a big guess, right? And you've kind of sort of solved a bit of that. And that's what's really cool.
Well, I think right at the beginning, I like numbers, but I like knowing the answers. So for me, going into a negotiation and knowing, well, if we do this, you'll do that. And then somebody said, well, it's going to cost you 10,000 to do that. Whether it's worth 10,000.
Yeah.
One of the earliest clients that we had, before we built it into software, I had it in certain parts of it in different Excel formats. And again, I may have told you that that grew arms and legs and became so big you couldn't even email it. It was so big. But some of the learnings then were basically understanding what would happen if you did X, Y, and Z. And there was I'm trying to think, I'm not going to name the retailer, but the retailer that this company was dealing with, I told you we keep all our clients confidential.
So you need to keep them confidential. We'll guess.
So anyway, this client was having a negotiation with one of the retailers and trying to do a promotion. And the retailer just said, oh, okay, that's fine. That's pay to play. So if you want to do the promotion, it'll cost you £7,000 just to do it for that week. And so we put it straight into the black box, and it came up that the only benefit that we were going to get was £2,000. And so they went straight back. In fact, they turned the PC round in the meeting and said, it's only worth 2,000. And the retailer went, okay, 2,000 will do, because it was in the black box. And so they saved 5,000 just by being able to push back. Whereas before that, it's 7,000. Okay, it's 7,000. So instantly, by having it in numbers, something a bit cleverer than the retail buyer's figures that he's been given that he has to charge, she has to charge. Having something in a black box can actually be a really good negotiation tool.
It really would. Sometimes in the world you're in consulting, we're fractional CROs. And sometimes in that world, I will be working with downstream companies and they will say, well, I can't afford it. And that kind of answer would say, you can't afford not to do it, right? Because everybody's looking for that return, whatever that return is going to be. And $1 or £1 is too much if you don't have it, right? But what if that pound generates X because you're going to go borrow that pound to get it done, right? And that's kind of how that would help so much in decision-making trees too, right? Because you're going, should we go this direction or should we go this direction? You have it immediately.
Once we've done all the crunching, then every product, it comes straight up with a profit curve, and you see where the optimum is. But if your optimum price for total profit pool is at a higher price than your average at the moment, you're already promoting too much. You shouldn't be promoting as much, because promoting will be costing you money.
Mm-hmm.
If the peak of the profit curve is on our thing to the right, which means lower price, then you can still promote harder and make more money. And then, as I said before, who's paying for that gives you the actual margins, and can you make more money? There was another point that you made there, and I've lost it.
Lost it. Well, when
I've
I
lost
look at some of you're in the consumer goods, right? And when I look at some of the implications that you're talking about, there's tons of marketers, there's tons of decisions that need to be made that the implications are really far reaching. They're not, to me, it's not just in that arena that this could help, for sure. There's decisions I have to remodel every single time to go, yeah. And how many hours does that take me to remodel every single time to try to make a decision? And you've got it just kind of right there.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Yeah. Well, no, now, yeah. If I go back to my the beer days, and that's when we started, building all of these kind of the thoughts and building it together. It was probably taking 2 to 3 months of data crunching, man days data crunching, to get to the result that we probably get in about 2 minutes now. So because everything's built in, so it does it, and that's using the speed of Microsoft Azure, and it still takes 2 minutes. So there's over 2.4 million calculations done on each lot, which is why it took so long to do it manually.
Yeah.
But the other point I was going to go back to, it did come back to me, was you mentioned about trust, and for us, I mean, you talk about trust in, I think we talked before. I'm going to pick on, hairdressers. I think, no, photographers. So local photographers, of which I know nothing about. So if there's a local,
so if you're playing one on TV right now. So here we go.
I didn't pick hairdresser. And the trust comes from, or in our world, it's how do people value your product, your service. And part of that is trust in the product or the service. And that builds we term it as the shopper equity. It's, how, if you can imagine, and I'm going to take it back away from, actually, no, let's stay with the photographer. So local photographer, and I have no idea what they charge, but let's say that one's got a very good reputation and they charge $500 to do whatever the photography is. And you've got another one that is just as good, but nobody's heard of. And they try charging 500, but because they haven't got that perceived value in the shopper's mind, well, I know about the number A, but I don't know about B. So I'll not take the risk on that. And there'll be a time when, and this is, a way that you can bring the prices down if it's a price thing, or you can build your brand equity up. And that's what all brands do. They build the brand equity, and then they find, what pricing can you get for it off promotion? And then what do you, are you elastic, and what could you go down to make the most money?
Yeah.
But on the hairdressers, you're pulling different levers. And sorry, I've gone from photographer to hairdresser.
Yeah, but hey, I was just going with it.
I'll just point out my own fault. So in a more local business, and understanding, again, we're back to what are those levers? What's driving my business, or what's stopping my business? As with mine, I was a bottleneck that was holding us back. So we needed to change that. So on the photographer, then how does the photographer build that equity? And it could be long term by getting more people in, and all they need is more local people to be talking about them the same way as they are about number A or letter A. Whereas lowering the price, you may have to come down a long way in price if people don't know your product, because they don't know what it's worth. And so dropping the price may not actually be the best way of doing it. Just while I'm on a roll, who, if I was in that situation in a small business, I would be noting down any data I can even create myself. So, and I know, how many customers I got at this price, how many customers I got at that price, and try and work that out. But any bits of data that you can put in, if you've got Excel, you can put any different subject. I told you I could bore on this subject.
I could too. And we, yeah. Keep going.
any different measure that you can get hold of on a time series, or and then you can put it into Excel to do correlations. And
Yeah.
then if you've got your volume or um, your sales, your revenue, whatever you're trying to measure, with the correlation, it'll give you a figure of, well, which one is driving those, and then you know which lever you might be wanting to pull. If you pull the wrong lever and you don't know all these kind of things, you could be spending a lot of money and not getting the result you want back. Um, we, I don't know whether this links, but one of our clients just a few weeks ago had 3 different product ranges, promoting all of them pretty much the same, because that's what retailers want.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did the crunching, and the result that came out was only one of their product ranges was elastic. So if you drop the price, you'll sell more, or sell enough to make more profit,
Yeah.
which is a slight difference. So on the other 2, they would drop the price and they would sell a very little bit more, but not enough to warrant the cost of reducing the price. So again, they'd been, well, either not measuring or measuring the wrong thing. They were just looking at their total revenue or their volumes. The volumes were slightly higher, but their profits were down. So again, understanding what lever does what for your business.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if people completely, especially new entrepreneurs, because they're very visionary. Some of them are really great with it, but I don't know if they completely sometimes comprehend what you're actually saying, because I'll use old Zig Ziglar. In the United States, Zig Ziglar was kind of a preacher salesman, right? He'd get up and he'd get everybody, so old Zig Ziglar would say he bought a bicycle, right? And he bought it from a thrift store. It was used, and it was because price was the most important thing to him at that moment, until he realized that he had to rebuild the bike for more than if he had bought it new, right? And he tells that story, and it's kind of funny, because he's talking about the value, the brand value is part of what you're saying for credibility. In PR, I'm not a PR specialist, but when we're dealing with trying to get a company's revenues going, it's usually the forerunner, because it gives value and credibility to the brand, which shortens the sales cycle, customer acquisition cost, all of the things kind of roll down that direction, right? And so when you're looking at all the drivers that you're talking about, the value portion of that, how they value, you can sometimes command a higher price, right? And because we use influencers for the same thing, right? If this is a known persona, whether or not that person even lives that value, people will follow that person. And if they say something, they will believe it, right? We see that in movies, we see that like in the celebrity syndrome, we see that in almost all of those things. So it's pretty amazing what you're doing. And if we look at the value of the time spent doing that, sometimes people will think, well, that's easy. I'll just monitor my own drivers. I will create this Excel sheet, and I will start to see the correlations. And then the factor of, you were talking about you as being the bottleneck, right? Because of how much time it takes to do that. They're not always factoring in how much time, which there is also value to how much that time is, right? You've got to replace it, because time is the only commodity, the only thing you own, right? Is your time, right? And that's one of the things, hopefully the only thing you own, right? So at the end of the day, so this has been so much fun, because you and I could talk forever on this stuff, because I love it. But I want to hear a little bit, and so do the listeners. What do you do in your free time? I talked about skiing. You talked about family somewhat. They want to hear a little bit more about Graeme himself, and maybe not the music of the numbers and analytics so much at this point. So what do you love doing, Graeme?
In addition to I like sports in general. I was a ski instructor at one point.
Wow.
I um, I've actually started getting into cooking. My family will be a bit surprised by that one, but I have. Usually when they're not there. Um, yeah, so I suppose one of my loves in life is innovating and inventing and problem solving. It all depends which word you want to put on it. If you say inventing, people just think, "Oh, you're a mad professor." But over the years, I've got about 55 different things that I've kind of invented, gonna build at some point. Yeah, not particularly patented, but I love looking at a problem, usually a practical problem, and thinking, okay, how can you sort that? So I won a prize a few years back with, I think it was Popular Science or something magazine,
Mhm.
and it was for an oil reclamation system. So when there's been an oil leak, of which there have
Oh,
been a few,
yes.
um, how can you A, contain it, but B, reclaim it without using chemicals?
Mm.
And so, yeah, I won quite a nice prize on that one. It's never been put into practice yet because I haven't done anything with it. So, but it's probably a mix of DIY and fixing things and innovating rather than inventing. But so that's probably the next things that starting to get really interested in, all of the renewable energies and
Yeah.
um, uh, using renewable energy to create hydrogen. And at the same time, you can use electricity to do desalination. And that way you could pump clean water to more arid parts of the world. And so, a whole ecosystem is in that. Um, that would only take multiple billions to turn on, but yeah, that's a small part. Probably all somewhere. Um,
Yeah, but I bet you could figure out the modeling to sell the fact that it might take multi-billions, but how much will it do for the future? I don't know. It's pretty exciting stuff that you're doing. And I know that you're extremely humble. You've already told me that. And not you haven't told me that. You're like, I don't talk about myself,
I would
all that
explain the
kind of
whole
stuff.
thing if I told you that.
I was going to say, you can't be humble if you told me that, right? It's like, maybe we need to practice humility. I don't know. No. So, Graeme, literally, people who are listening, literally before this interview, he was like dying because he's like going, "Oh, I don't talk about myself. I don't get into, I'll talk about numbers and all that kind of stuff." So he is actually quite humble. And it's kind of fun and refreshing to have had this fantastic conversation with Graeme. And so most of the people want to know kind of one way. We'll list all the ways that they can get a hold of you on Podbeam and on YouTube and all of that. But what's one way that people could get a hold of you to talk, well, about global economies and everything else, but also maybe for their studies for their business to help them get off the ground?
LinkedIn's probably the easiest way to find me. And other than that, then it's using my email at Graeme, Graeme, at aim -eu.com. So those two will usually get me. And yeah, if they reference your podcast and webcast, then at least I know where it's come from.
Well, that would be great too. Obviously, we love having the listeners. So, thank you all for listening to this. We're growing as a podcast. That's super exciting, and it's because of listeners and for those that support this. So, if you loved hearing this, love what Graeme was saying, share some love, like it, share it, tell people about it. And I'm so grateful again for all of you for listening. And Graeme, thank you for being on the show.
More than welcome. So there was many stories more I could have.
I know. Thanks again, everybody. Thank you all for joining another great episode. For show notes, links, and resources, visit revenuemaze.com. Hats off to all you small businesses out there. I can't wait for the next episode.